Welcome back to A1 Storyteller, where every tale is crafted to touch the deepest corners of your heart. Tonight, we bring you a story that will move you to your core, a tale of love, sacrifice, and a moment of profound devotion that will forever echo in the hearts of millions. When Pope Francis passed away, the world lost not just a leader, but a father, a man who gave everything to lift the world in compassion. And on that day, one Swiss guard broke the sacred protocols of centuries, not in rebellion, but in a display of pure, unyielding love. His actions would forever change the way we look at faith, loyalty, and devotion. Stay with us as we journey through a moment that shook the very heart of the Vatican and left a lasting imprint on the souls of those who witnessed it. This is a story you'll never forget. One that will stay with you long after the final words. The early morning air of Vatican City felt heavier than ever before, as though even the skies had lowered themselves in mourning. A dense mist wrapped itself around the towering pillars and statues, cloaking the sacred city in a silence that pressed on every heart. Across the world, from dusty village churches to grand cathedrals, millions of faithful sat in stunned sorrow, their faces lit only by the cold flicker of television screens bearing the unthinkable news. Pope Francis had passed away. It wasn't just the passing of a leader, it was the loss of a father, a bridge between heaven and earth who had shown the world a path paved with compassion, humility, and relentless hope. Bells tolled mournfully from the ancient towers, each sound echoing a collective cry of grief that seemed to make even the marble of St. Peter's Basilica shudder. Within the walls of the Vatican, the atmosphere was not just somber. It was broken, aching with a pain too vast for words. The people's pope was gone, and with him, it felt as though the world's last pure light had dimmed. Mothers clutched their children closer. Old men crossed themselves with trembling hands. In the hush that settled over Vatican City, the air tasted of salt and prayer, and even the ceaseless pigeons seemed to pause mid-flight, as if heaven itself had ordered the world to mourn. Inside the stone barracks of the Swiss Guard, Luca Hartmann sat in paralyzing silence, the fabric of his bright ceremonial uniform feeling unbearably heavy against his skin. He clutched his white gloves tightly, willing his hands to stop trembling. But it was no use. The storm within him raged louder than any command he had ever received. Pope Francis had not been a distant figure to him. He had been a savior when Luca had been drowning in doubt and loneliness. Years ago, when Luca was nothing but a scared, directionless young recruit, Francis had seen something worth believing in. He had spoken to Luca like a father to a son, with warmth, patience, and an unshakable kindness that could crack even the hardest heart. It was Francis who had picked up the broken pieces of Luca's faith and gently, lovingly showed him how to put them back together. Now, as he pulled on the gloves with shaking fingers, preparing to stand guard at the funeral of the man who had saved his soul, Luca felt a cavernous void open inside him. He was a soldier, trained to be stoic, to endure, but how could he armor his heart against the loss of the man who had once promised? "You are never alone." As the bells tolled once more, Luca realized with painful clarity that today he would be standing watch not for a leader, but for the man who had been his light in the darkest of nights. The rules of the Swiss Guard were etched in stone, passed down through generations like sacred scripture. Discipline, silence, unwavering loyalty. Especially today, with the entire world's gaze fixed upon St. Peter's Basilica, not even a breath could be out of place. Every guard had been drilled again and again on the importance of maintaining the highest decorum during Pope Francis' funeral, no matter what emotions churned inside them. They were to stand as statues, living symbols of the Church's eternal strength, no matter if their hearts were breaking into 1,000 pieces. Luca Hartmann tried to focus on these orders as he took his place along the central aisle, halberd in hand, the polished marble beneath his boots gleaming like a mirror. But even as the choir's mournful hymns filled the soaring basilica, and incense thickened the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, Luca's mind was slipping. He could not look at the simple cypress casket being carried down the aisle without feeling an unbearable weight pressing on his chest. Every step the pallbearers took toward him was another beat of loss hammering into his soul. Tradition screamed at him to stay still, but Luca's heart was louder. His vision blurred with tears he was not allowed to shed. His throat clenched around the words he was forbidden to speak. And yet, standing there like a prisoner inside his own skin, Luca realized he could not let the man who had once knelt to lift him from despair pass by without a final act of love. As the casket drew level with him, the moment that would define him forever overtook him like a wave, crashing against brittle stone. Luca stepped forward, abandoning centuries of unbroken protocol, and fell to one knee. His halberd clattered unnoticed to the floor, his hand trembling and bare, pressed against his pounding heart as he lowered his head in grief and gratitude. "Grazie, Papa," he whispered, his voice cracking with all the pain and love that words could never fully carry. Around him, a stunned silence gripped the basilica. Every eye turned toward him. The camera captured the raw humanity of a soldier who, for one sacred moment, chose love over law. In that single act, centuries of rigid tradition crumbled, and what remained was something far stronger. A living testament to the bond between a humble boy and a pope who had believed in him when no one else did. For a few eternal seconds, the world seemed to stand still. Still, Luca remained kneeling in the middle of the grand aisle, his chest heaving with the force of a grief too big to contain. The towering cardinals and bishops, the rows upon rows of dignitaries and pilgrims from every corner of the earth, all looked on in stunned silence. Then, like a flame leaping from candle to candle, something extraordinary happened. One by one, the other Swiss guards, standing in their polished stoic rows, began to move. Without hesitation, without fear, they dropped their halberds and sank to their knees. A ripple of reverence swept through the grand basilica, the bright colours of their uniforms pooling on the marble floor like a living tribute to the man who had taught them that love was mightier than obedience. Their armour clattered softly against the ground, but no one flinched. No command had been given, no signal had been passed. It was the purest, rawest form of devotion, soldiers laying down their weapons, their pride, and their centuries of tradition for the shepherd who had carried them all in his heart. The casket seemed to glow in the soft fractured light from the high stained glass windows, as if heaven itself was watching, weeping, and blessing this sacred defiance. Beyond the walls of the basilica, beyond the cobbled streets of Vatican City, beyond even the crowded piazzas where tens of thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, the world watched with bated breath. The moment was carried on live television screens, across social media, through news reports that couldn't find enough words to capture its heartbreak and beauty. Across oceans and borders, people saw the Swiss Guards, those proud, unyielding symbols of tradition, fall to their knees in mourning and love. And in living rooms and churches around the globe, there was not a dry eye to be found. Mothers clutched their rosaries tighter. Children, too young to understand the full weight of what they were seeing, pressed their hands to their hearts. Elderly men and women who had lived through decades of history wept openly, their wrinkled faces shining with tears. It was a moment that transcended language, nation, and creed. It was a cry of the soul. And through it all, the image of the Swiss Guards kneeling around the cypress casket of Pope Francis became an immortal symbol, a world laying its grief and gratitude at the feet of a man who had asked for nothing but love. Within minutes, images of the Swiss Guards kneeling spread like wildfire across the globe. News anchors struggled to hold back their tears as they narrated the scene. Commentators choked on their words, their polished professionalism crumbling beneath the raw, sacred beauty of what had unfolded inside St. Peter's Basilica. On social media, the world poured its heart out. Honoring Pope Francis flooded every platform. Millions of people, from presidents to the poorest of believers, shared the moment again and again, each post a thread weaving the earth into one shared tapestry of grief. Some simply posted the photo of Luca kneeling, unable to find any words that could match the depth of feeling. Others wrote long, emotional tributes to the Pope who had embraced the homeless, dined with prisoners, kissed the disfigured, without flinching. Stories of personal encounters with Pope Francis, quiet moments of mercy, small miracles of love, surfaced everywhere, each one reminding the world that they had not just lost a religious leader, but a living embodiment of God's tenderness. In every language from every nation, the cry was the same. We loved him. We needed him. We will never forget him. In a world too often torn apart by bitterness and division, the death of Pope Francis had, for one shining, aching moment, united humanity in grief and gratitude so profound it felt almost holy. But behind the scenes of the world's mourning, Vatican officials scrambled in confusion. Luca Hartmann had broken the oldest, strictest protocol of the Swiss Guard, a grave offense in the eyes of tradition. Yet how could they punish a man for giving voice to what every soul in the Basilica had felt? There were urgent, whispered meetings. Sette, questions filled the air like smoke. Would Luca be stripped of his title? Expelled from the Guard? Or worse, before any decision could be made, word came down from the newly elected Pope Benedict XVII. He wanted to see Luca personally. The summons hit Luca harder than any sword. Hands still trembling, heart still raw, he prepared to stand before the new pontiff, fully expecting to face disgrace, perhaps even exile. As he walked the long, echoing halls toward the papal chambers, each footstep sounded like a drumbeat of dread. But Luca knew he would not take back what he had done. No matter the cost, he had honored Pope Francis the only way he knew how, with his heart laid bare, with his soul unarmored. And if that meant his life as a Swiss Guard was over, then so be it. He had already given everything he had to the man who had once given him hope. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and Luca stepped into the private chamber of Pope Benedict XVII, his heart hammering so violently he could barely breathe. The room was flooded with soft golden light from the towering windows, but it felt suffocating as he dropped to one knee, his head bowed low in shame and expectation. For a long moment, silence reigned. Luca waited for the rebuke, for the cold, formal words that would tear away the only life he had ever known. Instead, he heard the gentle sound of footsteps approaching. A hand, firm yet full of grace, touched his shoulder, bidding him to rise. When Luca dared to lift his gaze, he found not anger, but tears streaming freely down the new pope's face. Pope Benedict XVII, still draped in the weight of his own grief for Francis, pulled Luca into a quiet embrace. There were no formalities, no scolding speeches, only the pure, shared pain of two men who had loved and lost the same gentle shepherd. "You honored him more purely than any ritual ever could," the Pope whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You showed the world what true devotion looks like. Not through duty, through love." Instead of punishment, Pope Benedict Roman XVII declared before the Curia and the gathered faithful that Luca would be recognized with the Vatican's highest honor, a medal of St. Michael, the defender of souls, for embodying the very spirit Pope Francis had spent his life preaching. Luca stood humbly as the medal was placed around his neck, but his heart was not filled with pride. It was filled with sorrow and a bittersweet sense of peace. In the days and weeks that followed, Luca became an unwitting symbol of what it meant to live with a heart unarmored. His single act of human vulnerability had captured the spirit of Pope Francis far better than any decree or encyclical ever could. Children sent letters to Luca from around the world, their crayon drawings of Swiss guards with angel wings tucked safely into the folds of their colourful uniforms. Families named their newborn sons after him. Even hardened atheists and cynics confessed that in that moment of kneeling, they had glimpsed something they could not explain, something divine. Yet Luca never sought the spotlight, never gave speeches or basked in adoration. Instead, he spent his days in quiet prayer, tending the memory of the man who had taught him that true strength was found not in standing tall, but in kneeling humbly before love. And as the seasons changed and the world slowly turned its face toward new sorrows and new joys, Luca remained a living echo of the Pope who had taught him, and all the world that the greatest act of faith is simply to love without fear. As time moved forward, the memory of that sacred day did not fade. Instead, it burned brighter in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. Luca's kneeling had not simply been a moment, it had become a movement, a living reminder that faith is not merely found in rituals, but in raw, fearless love. The world spoke often now of Pope Francis not just as a pope, but as a father whose compassion had reshaped the soul of humanity. Schools were named after him, hospitals dedicated in his memory, and entire neighborhoods painted murals of his warm, smiling face, cradling the forgotten and the broken. His simple cypress casket, once carried with trembling hands through St. Peter's Basilica, became a symbol of everything he had stood for: humility, tenderness, mercy. In every corner of the globe, from the smallest village to the grandest cities, people who had once felt invisible now found themselves seen and cherished because of his legacy. And every year, on the anniversary of his funeral, a special mass was held where the Swiss Guard laid down their halberds and knelt once again, heads bowed low, low, their colourful uniforms a river of devotion around the altar. Luca Hartmann, now older and marked by time, remained a quiet guardian of that memory. He would often be seen lighting a single candle at the foot of the grand statue of Pope Francis that now stood proudly in the Vatican gardens, his posture as humble and reverent as it had been on that first, heart-wrenching day. Tourists and pilgrims who crossed his path often wept without fully understanding, why, only that in his presence they felt closer to something sacred, something lost but never truly gone. Luca never spoke much of that day, nor of the medal that still lay tucked away in a simple wooden box beside his bed. He needed no reminders, for the lessons Pope Francis had etched onto his heart lived within him, vibrant and unyielding. He carried the Pope's spirit in every act of kindness, every prayer whispered for a stranger, every silent vow to never let the world forget the man who had shown them that even the smallest gestures of love could shake the heavens. And so, through Luca and through the millions he had inspired, the spirit of Pope Francis lived on, an eternal flame against the darkness, a song of love that would never ever be silenced. And so, the legacy of Pope Francis lives on, not just in the grand gestures of history, but in the quiet, heartfelt moments like the one we witness today. One man's act of devotion broke centuries of tradition, and in doing so, he reminded us all that love is the strongest force of all. The world will continue to turn, but we will forever carry the lessons he taught us. To love without fear, to show mercy without hesitation, and to kneel not in defeat, but in reverence for what truly matters. This was a story of faith, hope, and a love that transcended the boundaries of tradition. And as we remember Pope Francis, we remember that even in the darkest times, there is always light to guide us forward. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to A1 Storyteller for more powerful, unforgettable tales that will remind you of the strength of the human spirit. Don't miss the next chapter, because every story deserves to be told and every heart deserves to be touched. Until next time, remember, the greatest stories are the ones that live within us all.